Nikon ZF versus Fujifilm X-T5, round 2. Now, this is going to be my second video comparing these two cameras for a number of reasons. First, many of you reached out to me and accused me of being biased against the ZF in my first video, especially concerning the autofocus performance. Second, some Fuji shooters have reached out to me recently and they're telling me that they've already switched to a ZF in light of Fujifilm's ongoing autofocus concerns, and for which a patch is coming any day now, as of the filming of this video, which is sort of early November. So I thought that it was worth it to go another round with the ZF and give you my thoughts. Special thanks as always to my friends at B&H Photo in New York, because they sent me a ZF to try out for this review. And I've had the camera for about a month now, and I've gotten to use it pretty extensively before posting my thoughts today. So let's talk about the autofocus, because this is where I got the most pushback in my first video, because I described the autofocus as okay, but I didn't find anything special. Now, in every situation this time around where I used the ZF, the autofocus was very fast and accurate, and it worked really, really well. And I've used the ZF for portraits, for skaters, and for some low-light concert photography. Now, unfortunately, I don't know what happened to the pictures I took at the skate park. They just disappeared somehow, and it's a huge bummer, because the majority of them I reviewed, and they were all in sharp focus, pretty much. If I find them, I will share them with you. But overall, the camera performed like a champ filming skaters, both in still and in video mode. At the skate park, I used the ZF primarily in eye detect mode, and it had no issue tracking eyes and faces in continuous autofocus, which is pretty much Fuji's bane of late. And I have to say that the AF was much better than when I tested it the first time with the ZF, which was so weird, but obviously a pleasant surprise. Now, I'm not sure why this was, but perhaps there was something wrong with the camera I had originally, or it could have simply just been user error on my part. Either way, I'm glad that I gave it another go, and the autofocus worked really well. Compared to the X-T5, which mine has the latest firmware update, the ZF was much more confident and accurate than the X-T5's, and I was pleased that most of the photos that I got from it that I reviewed are in sharp focus, even in a dark club while I was taking concert photos. And I use the ZF in the same way I use the X-T5 when I do my concert photos, which is with a single medium or small size focusing point, generally an AFS, and I just manually move it where I want the camera to focus. Now, I prefer this to using a subject or an eye detect focus mode, because there's usually multiple people on the stage, and I just find it easier to point the focusing point where I want it manually than trying to move it around and choose faces. I also shoot a ton of concerts with the X-T5, and honestly, I don't have issues with it focusing even in a dark room. The main area where I notice a big difference between the performance of the ZF and the X-T5 is using eye detect focus and continuous focusing mode. ZF definitely is like light years beyond where the X-T5 is right now. But it's not perfect, because ZF does not have a dedicated joystick. Not having the joystick to move around focusing points was the biggest disappointment for me with the ZF. And I found myself not using the 3D tracking mode, because it was just easier to use a large focusing square and let the camera find the eye, as I said. I also wish there was an easier way to access and toggle through the focusing modes on the fly, instead of having to press the little eye menu button on the camera and then find what you want and manually choose it that way. So although I have a lot of issues with Fuji's menu system, the ability to map the focusing options and then use the joystick to simply cycle through them is definitely an advantage over the ZF. That doesn't have that, and that has only a D-pad for moving the focusing points around. One thing I didn't like so much about the ZF the first time I used it was it's sort of a brick-like camera. And I mean, Nikon was definitely faithful to their old SLR cameras when they designed the ZF, but those cameras were basically bricks. The ZF is a little bit larger than the X-T5. It feels a lot larger though, and ergonomically, it felt a lot more awkward to me, especially at first. But after using it for a while, the size and the shape of it seemed okay, and I didn't even want to have a grip attachment, which I know most ZF users tend to swear by. Now, I've been using it with a Nikkor 24-70 f4 lens primarily, and that lens is pretty compact for context. And I found a lot to love about the user experience and a few things that I missed about the X-T5. First, I don't mind the PASM switch on the ZF, and I think it makes sense for quickly adjusting how you want to use the camera. And the ISO and the shutter speed dial are raised. They have a solid click. So it was easy for me to adjust these on the fly, even in a very dark room, since I do prefer to shoot manually. I did greatly miss having an aperture ring on the lens, though, and using this small command dial on the front of the camera just wasn't the same as having a proper aperture ring like you get on all the native Fuji lenses. Now, you can get certain lenses for the ZF that have aperture rings, like some of the Viltrox lenses, which are excellent, but it is not standard on Nikon Z lenses like the 24-70 that I've been using, and I miss that most of all. Another small thing I'm not crazy about is the SD card being located in the bottom of the camera next to the battery. Having a side door like the X-T5 has is much preferred, especially if you use a tripod and a tether block, which I do all the time. Overall, though, the experience of using the ZF was similar to the X-T5, and I was enjoying the shutter and ISO dials and the old school shooting experience that I got from it after a short time of getting used to it. I do prefer the smaller size and the grip of the X-T5, however, and those of you who are really conscious of weight and size when it comes to your camera are probably going to find the ZF to be bulky. It didn't really feel that way for me. I don't mind this being a little bit larger. The ZF also has a really bright and high quality EVF, which is really nice, and another place where it kind of edges out the X-T5. All right, let's talk a little bit about image quality. Now, I did 0 pixel peeping for this review. I'm just over it. And since there are many reviewers who are going to do a better job analyzing images and doing all of that than I would ever do, I don't feel the need to do so. You can just watch their vids. So all I did was just use the ZF in situations where I would use the X-T5, and I found the images to be pretty awesome. I was mostly impressed with how it handled the concert photos in low light, even using an f4 aperture. There's lots of times where I'll shoot underexposed in this situation, and then I bump up the shadows in post, and the ZF had no issues handling my editing process. I did, however, greatly miss my Fujifilm simulations, so this is where the X-T5 really does have a huge advantage over the Nikon. And I did shoot in black and white on the ZF, and they looked great on the screen, which doesn't mean much, of course, but I couldn't figure out how to apply that film profile in Capture One. They just didn't appear on the list. So I basically manually created my own black and whites with the ZF, which was not as fun, obviously, and took more time. All right, if you've watched this video this far, you're probably asking yourself, am I planning to jump ship from Fuji and make this my new retro camera? The answer at this point is a solid no. I did, however, feel it was important to give the ZF a second look because I know that many of you who are currently Fuji users are unhappy with your AF performance and you've been thinking about switching. I know a lot of you have considered this, and some of you have already switched to it because you've told me so in comments and in other forums. I do think that if you get a ZF, you're going to be really happy with it. But for the diehard Fuji user, you're going to be losing some of your most treasured features like the aperture ring on native lenses, as I spoke about, the smaller form factor of the cameras you can get, and the film sims. Like everything, it is a compromise, and there's certainly no perfect camera out there. So it's a matter of finding what works best for you, what inspires you to shoot, and most importantly, what will get the job done, especially if you're a pro. If I decide, however, to pick up a ZF, don't worry because you will be the first to know. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, do all that good stuff. Make sure you visit my friends at B&H Photo in New York because their support makes videos like this possible for me, and they're linked in the description below. And please leave me a comment. Let me know where you stand on the ZF versus the X-T5 issue. Here's wishing you an amazing day. Go out, take some great pictures, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.